Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're at. Today is our second webinar in our summer webinar series for PNSQC, and we're featuring today our guest speaker, Rich Sheridan, who is also one of our keynote speakers this fall in October at our annual conference. Today's webinar is called Fight, Fear, and Embrace Change. Rich, if you could flip to the next one there. Okay. First, a little bit about our organization. We are the oldest software quality conference in North America. It's hard to believe that we're in our 35th year. Our annual conference is held every year in Portland, and it's usually held in October. And one of the things that really differentiates our conference is that our conference speakers and participants are really just describing their own experiences and how they've tackled different problems and made progress in furthering the software quality field, whether they be a developer or a tester or a designer, and as well as many different roles. And so we have a wide range of topics ranging from agile, DevOps, security, performance testing, and as well as some soft topics, I guess you could say, on leadership and management and things like that. So that's it for the organization. And next, we're going to go into some house rules for the webinar. Basically, all of the participants other than the speakers are muted, but we are going to be recording the webinar, and you can also ask questions via the question panel in the GoToWebinar panel. You will receive a recording, links to the recording after the webinar, so feel free to follow us on YouTube, where you can access all of the webinars as well as this one. And let me move on here. My name is Phil Liu. I'm a board member of PNSQC and a volunteer. All of the whole conference is run by volunteers, and I just volunteer my time. Today, I'm the moderator for the webinar, and I get the opportunity to introduce our speaker, Rich Sheridan. Rich is one of our keynote speakers, as I mentioned earlier, and he's actually written a book on joy. Unfortunately, I haven't, Joy, How We Built a Workplace People Love. And unfortunately, I haven't read the book yet, but I certainly will. I just had a conversation with Rich before we got started here, and how his pursuit into this really germinated back in the Agile days and the foundations of Agile when the manifesto was written and so forth. So I'm really glad that we have Rich here to provide a different viewpoint on we as in the software development field and how we can approach our work and create better results as well as being happy at the same time. So I will let Rich take it away and talk about how to fight fear and embrace change.
Awesome. Great to be with you, Phil. Thanks for having me. Looking forward very much to my keynote in October with your group. Yep, I'm the guy who wrote a book called Joy Incorporated, but today I'm going to talk to you about fear. And interestingly enough, Phil and I were talking before we kicked off today, and he was making sure that I was going to relate this to the issues of Agile and quality and that sort of thing. And we look all the way back to 1999, 2000, when Kent Beck's book Extreme Programming Explained came out. The subtitle of that book was Embrace Change. And I am here to tell you that my life was not always joyful. And I'm guessing that people attending this webinar and who attend conferences like the PNSQC conference are also not leading very joyful lives. I was, I'm a programmer by trade and training in education, and I spent the first 20 years of my life writing code, and I can tell you that there were a lot of issues that were causing me to question whether I had chosen the appropriate career path. And for me, it was a question of delivering substandard results to the world, spending lots of time away from family. This picture that you have in front of us is that I missed a lot of family celebrations, including sometimes my own birthday celebrations, and would come home late at night after long, long days, sometimes all-nighters and so on. And my wife would look at me and say, "Honey, did you get a lot done today?" And I realized in that moment that I'd probably gotten nothing done, because I was living in a land of chaos. And I will just say that, I'll just flip back to this slide for a second. The chaos in the software industry is probably easiest to understand for the people who work in quality circles. I know in the quality area, people are often being given software long after the original due date, being asked to test quality in when in fact they barely can get the software to compile, let alone run. And then they're under the gun because any bugs they find, any problems they discover is going to slow down the release. So they're encouraged not to find anything, that we'll just document things and we'll fix it in the next release. And almost always those days never come. I get invited into a lot of companies. I get invited in to talk to teams that are struggling with their own challenges in this area. And one particular poignant story I remember was a gentleman who brought me in because he'd heard about our team. He heard about the agile approaches we had taken, the culture we had built here at Menlo, the fact that we talk about the business value of joy and what that means and so on. And he was leading a very different life than me. He was much more in that fear part of his life than I was now. And he asked me how I got there. How did I get from where I was to where I was going? Because he said, "Rich, we had a big disaster last November." And he says, "My boss, the CEO," he was a CIO at the time. He says, "My boss, the CEO says, you got one more chance. If you don't hit your April deadline, well, you better hit that one or else." And I asked the guy, I said, "Or else what?" And he said, well, he wasn't explicit, but I think you know what he means. I said, well, you know, if you don't hit your April 1st deadline, that's going to make April 2nd really interesting around here. And sure enough, I've looked back at his LinkedIn page and found out he didn't last much longer than that. And so he brought me in to try and learn the approach that we had taken, an approach that, quite frankly, for us is meant as a software design and development firm. That's what we do for a living. We haven't had a software emergency since 2004. He said, "How'd you do it, Rich? How'd you get there? How did you get your quality up to a point where you don't have software emergencies anymore?" And what I told him was, I said, "We established a culture of make mistakes faster." And I can tell you it's the last thing on earth he wanted to hear. He was like, "Rich, I'm here to try and figure out how not to make any more mistakes, and you're telling me make them faster?" Well, what kills most projects, most organizations, most efforts isn't mistakes, because we're going to make mistakes. We're human. That's a natural part of a human activity, is to make mistakes. What kills most organizations isn't making small mistakes quickly. It's making one big, slow mistake, like a slow-moving train wreck. And so I told him we had to establish a different kind of culture here, one that said, let's try things to see how they work, and if they don't work, let's correct them quickly. And I will tell you, that requires a different kind of system, requires a different kind of culture, and it requires a different kind of team dynamic than typically exists in our industry. And the first thing I talked about is we have to establish a culture of safety, psychological safety for the people who are doing the work. And the reason I have this picture of an HVAC system is I think an HVAC system is a really good metaphor for a safe culture. Imagine what we need to do as leaders is pump fear out of the room the way an HVAC system might pump cold air out of a room. We need to filter out ambiguity the way an HVAC system filters out dust and pollen. We need to warm the temperature up to a nice, safe temperature. And as leaders, if we can create an environment where we can pump safety back into the room, we get people feeling more comfortable with one another. Perhaps you'll start to see in a safe environment collaboration emerge, teamwork, and suddenly you're getting the things that everyone is yearning for: creativity, imagination, invention, innovation, human energy. If we don't create that safe environment, we run into big problems. And the big problems we run into often sink our efforts. You know, you can imagine if you're trying to change something in a large organization, perhaps you've seen this in your own organization, you go up to somebody and say, hey, I think, you know, we do everything this way, but we'd like to try a new way. Maybe we should move down the agile path, as many have over the last couple of decades now. Someone says, well, that's not how we do things here. That's not all the investment and process we've made. So that deadly paralysis of that's not how we do things here starts to sink in. Or perhaps you do move forward. Perhaps you do start making changes and you find out it's not working. You find out it isn't working as well as you thought it would, but now you're afraid to make changes again because, you know, number one, you were afraid of doing things that weren't going to actually work, so you didn't want to be seen as somebody who tried something that didn't work. And once you've actually decided to make a change, now you're doubling down your bet even if it's not working. So we get caught in these deadly paralysis of sunk cost thinking where once we try something, we have to stick with it even if we know it's not working. So we don't want that. What we don't want at our company and what we think everybody needs to avoid is this artificial fear that drives most of our organizations. I remember in my earliest career days, I was taught to lead with fear. When I broke out of my managerial eggshell, when I first started leading teams, the person I imprinted on was the person I worked for. And he used to teach me, he'd say, Rich, you know, if you want to see how things are going, just walk around and walk up into a cube and say, hey, how's it going? What you working on? Are you almost done? Are you coming in this weekend? Just simple questions like that start to create a fear in the person you're talking to. I'm guessing if you have somebody like that in your life and me just saying what I'm saying, you can feel your blood pressure beginning to rise. If we create all kinds of systems that are simply about creating fear in order to motivate, we actually get so far away from safety that we diminish the human part of our team. There's actually physiological things that happen to us in this kind of environment where our bodies started generating adrenaline and cortisol, and they start shutting down that most human part of our brain. And we start to realize that in that case, we're not getting the highest performance out of our team. And then all of a sudden we're shutting down the creativity, the imagination, the energy. And I can tell you, fear does not make bad news go away. Fear makes bad news go into hiding.
Rich, what would you say would be some of the biggest types of, you know, what you call artificial fears?
So a simple one is, like I told you about that other gentleman I was talking to, where the boss comes in and says, you're going to hit this deadline or else, right? There's a big dollop of artificial fear, because the real question then is, or else what?
Right.
And the implication was, or else you're fired,
Mm-hmm.
or else you're out of here. That's an existential threat against a person. And of course, what happens in that kind of environment? It doesn't make the mistakes go away. It just makes them go into hiding. You know, we have you'll see in a little bit here, we have a color-coded dotting system that we use to chart the progress of particular things. And a red dot says there's trouble. A yellow dot above a piece of yarn says that something's behind. Well, I can tell you, if we pump enough artificial fear in the room, project plans always look perfect. Everything's on target. There's a great story inside of a wonderful book called American Icon, and it's Alan Mullally's rise at Ford Motor Company. And Alan is running his leadership team meeting as the entire group from Ford Motor Company, you know, the leadership team of Ford in with him. And he'd go around and he just had this color coding system. He's like, I need everybody to report out red, yellow, or green. And every week they met, it was green, green, green. Everything's green, boss. Finally stopped the meeting one day. And he says, guys, I'm intrigued. He says, we're about to lose $7 billion. And my entire leadership team says everything's on track, everything's green. Do you guys see the same thing wrong with this picture that I do? And excuse me. And they all looked at him and said, nope, boss, everything's green. And it was only one day where Mark Fields came in and he had a problem to report to the team that he could no longer hide. Was going to shut down production, excuse me, of one of the most important new vehicle launches they were going to have, the Ford Edge. And and Mark couldn't hide that. And he assumed that was going to be his last day at Ford Motor Company. And at that point, got around to Mark and he said, "Red, boss." And everybody looked at him, and Mark said the thought bubble over everybody's head was dead man walking. So Mark Fields, last day at Ford Motor Company, and says, "Tell me what's going on, Mark." He says, "Well, we got a problem we don't know how to deal with. We're shutting down production of the Ford Edge. We don't know how long it will take." And Mullally's reaction in that moment was critical to the reestablishment of a different kind of culture at Ford. What he started doing was clapping. And he said, "Finally, we can run this business. Now, who around this table can help Mark with this problem?" And suddenly everybody came forward and said, "Hey, we can get a team of people down there. What kind of problems do you have, Mark? What evidence do you have? What's the data?" And suddenly a new day had dawned at Ford Motor Company in that moment, simply because Alan Mulally chose not to go down the fear route, but to go down the safety route and say, "Thank you for sharing bad news, Mark. Mm-hmm. Now we can start to work together as a team." Does that help?
Yeah,
Phil?
That's fantastic. Thanks a lot. I understand. Yeah.
And and look, I probably know as well as anybody, given I didn't do the role of quality assurance in any teams I led, that this fear rubber hits the road, I think, hardest in QA than it does anywhere else in the organization, because QA is in charge of finding problems. And we often malign the people who are finding problems. We pull them aside and say, "Don't tell anybody about that problem." Well, boy, you don't have to do that too many times before you establish a culture that says, "Good enough. Let's get it out there. We don't care anymore." And that really starts to diminish the energy and the effectiveness of any human team. And quite frankly, this can become a deadly problem. And in the book, I wrote this, that Roger Boisley, who was a former insider at Morton Thiokol, a maker of the infamous booster rockets and suspect O-rings that led to the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger, offered the following thoughtful analysis of artificial fear at Morton Thiokol. He said many opportunities were available to structure the workforce for corrective action, but the Morton Thiokol management style would not let anything compete or interfere with the production and the shipping of booster rockets. And of course, we all know what happened. And the fact of the matter is, fear can kill. Because if we hide enough bad news, a disaster can happen. And it isn't always as dramatic as a space shuttle blowing up and killing people. But it can kill a product launch, it can kill an initiative, it can kill an entire company if we're not careful. So this idea of fighting fear and embracing change and getting into a safe mode of working and in an environment where make mistakes faster and building a collaborative environment can have dramatic effects on quality. And in many ways, this is the spirit and energy of the original Agile movement, is let's stop kidding ourselves that we know all the answers. But let's not get into this analysis paralysis mode where we're going to stop and wait till we have perfectly formed answers before we move forward, because that'll kill us as well. So the question is, how can we establish a different kind of culture that continually moves forward, makes small mistakes, makes them obvious when they happen, and allows us to correct them while they're still small so we don't have disasters in our organization. And often these discussions lead to questions of accountability. And I think accountability is probably one of the most dangerous words in business today, and likely at the center of what it takes to create a fear-based organization rather than a safe organization. And my example of this is the way we handle accountability at Menlo. I was teaching a class to a company in Atlanta a number of years ago, and somebody asked me about accountability. And they said, Rich, how does accountability work at Menlo in your safe environment? And I said, well, let's give an example. I said, first and foremost, accountability has to be circular. And they didn't know what that meant. I said, well, in order for me to ask for accountability from you, I have to deliver accountability to you in equal measure. So for example, if I'm going to say, I need you to be accountable for this, I need to step back and say, and what is my responsibility to making sure if I ask you for that accountability, that you have what you need in order to perform it, rather than just pushing it all down. Most accountability is one way. So when I said circular accountability, I had the entire management team with me of this tech firm down in Atlanta, and they were all confused. Like, what do you mean? Accountability isn't something you give. Accountability is something you ask for. I said, well, not at Menlo. I said, for example, when there are estimates that we do here about how long things are going to take, would I assure the team the accountability I deliver as a CEO of this company to my team is this: you will never, ever be punished for missing an estimate. And that just freaked them out. They're like, what are you talking about? How else could you get, accountability to your team? And I said, well, here's what I'm doing. First of all, I'm making it safe for them. Please give me your best guess at how long things are going to take. And oh, by the way, if you miss, I get it. You made a mistake. And now I can ask for something in return. By making it safe for them, I can now ask for something in return. I can ask them, as soon as they think they're going to miss, raise your hand. Tell somebody. We had to teach our project managers in that circumstance to smile and say, thank you for sharing that information. That's about as different a life as I ever lived from my previous life, where it was always pounding a fist on table saying, this is how it's going to be. Well, I'm telling this executive team, this structure that we use at Menlo, and they just go dead quiet. They practically won't even make eye contact with me. And their head of marketing stands up, and he used the exact terms, and I'll lighten it up just a little bit. He points at me and he says, this is BS, Rich. He says, let me tell you how accountability works here at our company. He says, if you tell me you're going to get something done by Friday at 5 o'clock, you're going to get it done by Friday at 5, or you're staying the weekend. I don't care if it's Christmas Day the next day. I don't care if it's your kid's birthday. I don't care if you got a vacation plan. You're staying. You're going to meet your commitment. That's how accountability works here. And I looked at him, and he was pretty fired up. Everybody else was wondering how I was going to respond. I was pretty calm. Heck, I was going to be gone the next day. And I said, Bob, let me speculate with you. What would happen if I switched to your version of accountability at Menlo? How about if I just changed everything we did at Menlo to work exactly like you do here? Now, it was interesting because I could almost watch every cell in his body changing from head to toe as he contemplated the answer. And he said, I'll tell you what would happen, Rich. People would start lying about being done. They would start cutting corners around quality. They start tucking stuff under the rug, saying it's done when it really isn't. You start delivering inferior product to the marketplace, your customers would start to notice. It would start to affect market share. He says, you start to lose your place in the market because you got a bad reputation for delivering poor quality things to the world. He says, I'll tell you what would happen, Rich. You'd have at your company exactly what we have here. And he got it. He got it in an instant that he was part of the problem. And I will tell you, the first person who had to change and moving towards safety and away from fear was me. I had to change the way I led people because the effects were so insidious, and they all bore themselves out in poor quality going out to the world. I talked to that team 2 years later, and they said that guy had never been the same since. It literally, that moment of clarity for him changed him for a lifetime. And this is a really important message for all of us to try and digest, is what role is artificial fear and words like accountability and pointing fingers across the room having on the quality effects that we're trying to deliver to the world. We do a lot of crazy things here at Menlo, and this is, I guess, in the sense of embrace change. We look at everything we do and say, how could we do it differently to make more sense for the humans? One of the crazy things we do here is we plan with paper, little folded pieces of paper, size to the size of the estimate. An 8-hour card is folded in half. A 16-hour card is twice as big as 8. A 32-hour card is twice as big again as 16. A 4-hour card is an 8-hour card folded in half. And then we plan it against a budget, these tabloid size sheets of paper that have an inscribed box, so we know what fits in the plan and we know what doesn't fit in the plan. If we want to draw attention to cards, we'll put it on hot pink paper. Now, I will tell you, a lot of people look at what we do and they say, my gosh, you're kidding me. You're a software company and you plan with paper? You're like the Amish of software development. And I tell them, well, we choose tools we believe work better for humans, and humans are visual, tactile creatures. And so our planning efforts make sure everything fits. How do we make sure everything fits? Because it physically has to fit together on these sheets of paper that represent time and humans and budget. All of these things are captured in one simple tool. And I would suggest to your audience that some of the things we invent in order to improve things like quality often become too complex themselves. Sometimes simple answers can be really valuable answers to create an effective system in order to produce higher quality. And that's one of the things we've done in terms of how we plan. So I'm going to tell a story about change and about embracing change, but the real message behind this story, even though there's a story that's going to revolve around babies, which can be like a strange story to tell inside of a conference like this, but this story is important not because of the babies. The story is important for one simple phrase that I want to encourage your audience around, and that is to run the experiment. There's so often as teams, we'll sit around in a conference room or at lunch, we'll talk about things we could do differently, we can talk about things we can improve, and somebody might say, yeah, but that's not how we do things here. We've always done things differently, or we tried that once and it didn't work, or I've seen that not work elsewhere. I just want to encourage your audience around one simple idea, and that is shrug your shoulders in that moment, look them in the eye and say, yep, I get it. But let's try it. Let's see what happens. Let's not defeat the idea before we get started. Let's try it, see what happens. Let's run the experiment. And so one of the most famous experiments we've run here at Menlo does in fact involve babies. Little Maggie was born about 11 years ago now. Mom took off a few months for maternity leave. She was ready to come back to work. There was an exciting new project that she wanted to join in on. She came up to me and said, hey, Rich, I'm ready to come back to work. And I said, that's great, Tracy. How soon can you be here? And she said, well, we have a problem. The daycare we plan to use is full. Grandparents live too far away to help. My husband and I don't know what to do with Maggie. I don't know how I'm going to come back to work. Now, in that moment, there was a screaming match in my brain that Tracy never heard. There was the dark voice on one shoulder and the bright voice on the other shoulder. And the dark voice said, don't you dare say what you're about to say. HR will kill you. The lawyers will freak out. The insurance policies will go through the roof. The bright voice said, you're the entrepreneur. You can do whatever you want. You don't even have an HR department. And I looked at Tracy. I said, bring her in. She said, what do you mean? I said, bring her into work. She said, all day? I said, yeah. She said, every day? I said, why not? And she looked at me and she looked around the big open room that's Menlo, because we're working in one of those big open office environments where there are no cubes, offices, walls, or doors. And she said, Rich, where will I put her? I said, Tracy, she's 3 months old. She's not going anywhere. Put her in bassinet on the floor, wherever you're working. She says, but what if she makes a fuss? Won't that disturb the whole team? I said, Tracy, it's like a noisy restaurant here. We're always talking. We work in pairs. Everybody's talking all day long. I said, you'll never hear her. She said, come on, Rich, you've raised daughters yourself. You know how fussy babies, how loud they can get. And I said, Tracy, you're the mom. I trust you. You'll do the right thing. We'll work it out together. Let's run the experiment. Now, I will tell you that I didn't know how it would turn out. And, and it was, we weren't sure what to expect. Now, you look at that picture and you think, man, what a cute baby. The interesting thing is that's not little Maggie. That's actually Ellie. That's Menlo baby number 8. We're actually now up to 18 babies in the last 10 years. And we've got 2 on the way right now. So we're literally almost on the cusp of 20 babies in 10 years. So we're producing babies at the rate of 2 a year here now at Menlo. And they typically come in all day, every day from about 3 months old till about 7 months old. Now, I will tell you, if you run the experiment, expect the unexpected, especially if it involves little humans. You know, I will tell you that Maggie, we didn't expect. Ellie, in this particular case here, learned to pair program. Actually joined the team for the programming. Ellie went to design meetings. And there were other things we didn't expect. When Maggie did fuss, and of course she did, she was a baby, it was a team's response we didn't expect. They had like sign-up sheet. They're like, no, it's my turn to hold the baby. And then we found out that, and this is Henry coming back to visit after a few years away, we found out that our customers behave better when you bring a baby to the meeting. The babies literally became a part of the marketing team. So this was a delightful experiment on our part. It worked out so incredibly well to give the parents the opportunity to enjoy time with their kids, even when they're at work. A lot of people ask us about productivity, and the only thing I say is compared to what? Compared to the parent who has to run out the door when the daycare calls with a sniffly kid or something like that. You know, here the parents are probably a little less productive, but I'm not sure they're less productive than they would be if their child was off somewhere else. So this has been a delightful experiment for us. Now, what I'm not saying is that your culture isn't going to improve and you're not going to get to safety unless you get babies in the room. I would definitely encourage the idea, but this isn't about the babies. This is about running the experiment, trying things and seeing what happens. And this is a critical part of our make mistakes faster culture here. It isn't just about the work and moving things forward and seeing how things go and correct things when they're still small. It's about how we improve our culture systematically over time, rather than spending an inordinate amount of times in meetings trying to figure out if this will work, will this work, let's think about all the ways it won't work and so on. Our answer is, I don't know. Let's try something. Let's move it forward. If it doesn't work, we'll either stop, we'll adjust, we'll try something else, and so on. So critical part of our environment here. This is Henry learning how to manage, walking around the room saying, hey, how's it going? What you working on? And then I'll tell you one other story, and it's a story about the dogs of Menlo. We also have had dogs throughout our entire history. But this particular story is not about a Menlo dog. The gentleman in the orange shirt called me before his weekly show and tell with our team. This is Michael in the orange shirt talking with Megan and Laura, 2 of our high-tech anthropologists. And he called me before the meeting and he said, hey, Rich, do you mind if I bring Buster to the meeting? And I said, sure, who's Buster? He says, my Great Dane. I thought, oh, this ought to be interesting. We had a couple of dogs in the place. And so Michael walks in and he comes in with Buster in tow. And Buster greeted me by putting his paws on my shoulders, and I'm 6'5", and his head still towered above me, but a gentle giant of a dog. And what I realized in this moment is, again, it's a clever story about dogs, but the most important part of the story was Michael knew we embraced dogs when we were here at Menlo, at work. Michael couldn't bring his dog into where he worked. It actually wouldn't be appropriate. There was nothing wrong with his company. Just he worked in a medical lab. It just wouldn't be appropriate to have dogs in a medical lab. But when he was interacting with us, he chose to be more like us. He chose to join our culture when he was working with us. And this is another message I want to send out to your listeners and to your audience, and that is that if we can create a culture that's so compelling and so inviting and so energizing that the people we interact with, people who aren't directly connected to us, maybe other departments in an organization, other divisions within a company, or customers themselves, like in this case, where they choose to be more like us when they're working with us, that becomes a very powerful indicator that you've created a culture that's very safe and inviting and encouraging. And now you get the kind of collaboration and teamwork, effective teamwork that all of us are yearning for in our work lives. And the fact of the matter is, the software industry has gotten to the point that it is no longer possible for individual heroes to rule the day. We now need teams, and often large teams of human beings working together collaboratively for a long period of time. And the only way we can accomplish that is building the human relationships, feeding the human energy of our teams, and creating a culture that people want to be a part of every single day. So again, I just want to encourage your listeners to break through that veil, break through the things that are keeping you back from trying new things. You don't have to change your whole world. You don't have to change the world. We have a motto here at Menlo. Our mission statement is to end human suffering in the world as it relates to technology. That's a big mission. We can't do it for everybody, but we can sure do it in our place. We can do it in our room. So can you. You can do it in a unit as small as maybe your team or your department. You don't have to change the whole company to get started, but just simply take that advice that I gave you earlier, run the experiment, try stuff, see what happens, move forward, break down barriers that perhaps are easy to break down, much easier than you thought if you just kept moving forward. I am happy to take questions and talk about any aspect of our culture and how this relates to quality. And we've created a special landing page for you guys that you can download a free chapter of my book. You can download copies of this slide. You can come and visit. We have about 3,000 to 4,000 people a year who simply come through our doors and come see what we do, and we teach explicitly the practices we use here. So again, Phil, thank you so much for inviting me into your world, and I look forward to seeing you all in Portland in October.
Yeah, Rich, I was just wondering, one question did come in. You know, the title of the webinar was related to creating joy at work, and so I guess what you're saying is to create joy at work, we had to remove fear.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I think if you could juxtapose two companies, I think you could juxtapose Joy Inc. against Fear Inc.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you get to joy through fear.
Mm-hmm. I guess they're almost diametrically opposed.
I believe that's true.
Yeah, yeah. So would there be any pointers, or maybe this is something that you cover in your book, or you're going to cover in your talk at the conference about, what would be other big things besides fear, in terms of focusing on getting rid of fear is one thing, but what about the part on the positive side? What things can we do to actually be positive in creating joy in the workplace?
Yep. Well, I think, for me, there's a bit of a formula here when we talk about joy. The first thing we look at is externally to the organization. What is our external focus of our team, of our department, of our company? Who do we serve, and what does delight look like for those people? What would joy look like for the people we serve? And, I want to channel the heart of the engineer right now. Software development is a hard activity. Getting a software product, a quality software product out to the world is probably one of the most unique endeavors mankind has ever undertaken, because software is so theoretical until the point where we actually release it to the world and have people start using it. So the first thing we think about when we think about joy is external to the company. Who do we serve? The end users of the software that we're creating for our clients. And then what would delight look like for them? And so if we can get that external focus to our organization, looking outside ourselves, working on something that's bigger than ourselves, working in service to others, that's kind of the first sort of cornerstone of building a joyful culture. Is first, let's look outside. Now, I don't believe for a second you can produce that kind of joy in the world unless there's joy in the room. But now as systems thinkers, we have to start looking through what are all the things we do, and quite frankly, all of the things we don't do that will lead to producing those kind of joyful effects. And so there's so many things that we do here that are specifically laser beam focused on creating that kind of joy in the world. Number one, we only work 40-hour work weeks, which is crazy in our software industry, right? The software industry is the death march industry. Software industry is the 24/7 industry. And yet here we are, we work 40-hour work weeks. We don't work weekends. We never deny or delay vacation requests. We've created an entire system that we can still meet our customers' deadlines without having to work our team to death, because our fundamental belief is that tired people make bad software. We don't want to make bad software,
Mm-hmm.
so we don't systematically tire out our people. Now, in order to do that, you have to change a lot of the standard practices of software. This is one of the reasons we pair. We work 2 people to 1 computer, and we switch the pairs regularly, at least once a week. And so everybody's building relationships with one another, and there's no one who owns a singular piece of code, which allows them to go on vacations without worry, without taking a laptop with them, without having to be on call in case something goes wrong in a piece of code that only they know about. And so all of these things fit together. And there's a lot of other processes we do here in the quality framework that I'll talk about in my keynote that are really key on making sure we can avoid emergencies, work, as Deming said, work with pride, and get quality stuff. The how part of Menlo is very important, but it's all our systems working together that systematically produce that joy in the world.
Yeah. Thanks, Rich. Yeah, I guess my question really spurred on a lot of questions. They're starting to come in now. If you don't have a little bit of time. One question is, does Menlo use a red, yellow, green check-ins for team meetings? And, have you found any other mechanisms to evaluate how everyone in the room is coming to the meeting emotionally, or, how they're doing on the project?
We have run some experiments with that, but what's interesting is because we all work in one open room together, we have a daily stand-up at 10 a.m. where everybody reports in their pairs how they're doing, what they're working on, that sort of thing. You can actually feel how the team's doing just by being in the room. You can feel the human energy because we're all out in the room together, including me. There is no corner office for the CEO, which I think is actually pretty important, to be out in the room with everybody else. You can see it, you can feel it, you can touch it. I mean, it's palpable. And if the team's struggling, and we do, I mean, there's a big difference in my mind, between joy and happiness. I'm happy to go down that route. Joy is that long arc of delivery, of accomplishment, like running a marathon. You probably feel joy when you've actually completed a marathon, but all the training, all the execution when you're actually running the marathon, I'm sure you're not happy the whole time. I've never done it, but I can only imagine how painful a process that is. But the joy and the elation of actually accomplishing something as big as that has got to be profound. Mm-hmm. And so for us, we're not looking for everybody's happy every minute of every day. We think that would require medication, but we do look for the human energy of the space, the human energy of the room as a good indicator, and you can feel that kind of every minute of every day. We don't use red, yellow, green check-ins at status meetings or anything like that, but we do have a wallboard display with all of our tasks on it for each team, for each pair of people. Yellow says that's what they're working on now. Orange says they think they're done. Green says they are in fact done, and it's ready for what we call a show and tell event with our customers. And so we use a lot of visual management systems here to keep things on track, keep projects on track, keep information flowing. For example, one of the things we do when we communicate internally inside the company with one another, because we're all in one big open room, we don't have to use electronics. We use what we like to call high-speed voice technology. We just talk to one another. And when your communication paths include eyebrows and body language and tonal inflection, we're pretty good at, as humans, to figure out, how's this other person feeling? How are they doing?
That's a funny one. High-speed voice communication. Okay.
Exactly. Who knew? All the hardware was pre-installed at birth.
Yeah. So another follow-up question to that was that if somebody is not performing well, how do you motivate them to change in a positive direction without using fear-based tactics around losing their job?
Yeah.
And what if?
Yeah. So the key thing I teach our team in that regard, because I think this is one of those areas where as a leader and somebody with, now I'm going to turn 60 this year, so I have a fair amount of experience in just life and business in general. Is if somebody's not performing and you see it, and it's pretty obvious in our world, if you're paired with somebody who isn't performing and seems like something has dropped off for them, just look them in the eye and say, are you okay? Check in with them first as a person before you check in with them as a team member or an employee or as another programmer or a quality assurance person on the team. Check in with them as a human being. there might be something else going on in their lives that's really important that's dragging them down. And you having the compassion and empathy to just look them in the eye and say, are you okay right now? I'm concerned about you. Assume that they're a good person. Assume that you're going into this with, you know, the attitude that says, I need to help you. I'm here if you need help. You know, if the person says, oh, no, I'm fine. Okay. Now let's talk about some things I'm seeing that give me good concern, you know, and enter into those conversations with dignity and respect, and you can keep a lot of the fear at bay. Now, at a certain point, you know, the conversation might escalate to the point to say, you know what, this is the kind of behavior that if we keep seeing it, I'm not sure you can stay. And that might feel like you're generating fear, and you probably are, but that's no longer artificial fear. You know, that's something that, you know, imagine if we don't keep that, we don't have that information flowing. And then one day you get called into the office and say, hey, we're going to let you go today. You're like, what? What do you mean? Well, you've been performing so poorly for so long. We just realized it was time to, you know, cut to the chase and let you go. And they're like, boy, what was I doing? You know, could you have given me any indication along the way that something wasn't going well? Right. And so we work really hard, and this is one of the reasons we have books around our office like Crucial Conversations and Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbiter Institute and the Anatomy of Peace, because human communications, you know, effectively communicating with another human being about something that's really important to both of you is still one of the hardest things just about being a person. You know, this plays out in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, in our cities, you know, and obviously in our workplaces. So we have to practice this every single day. We have an interesting structure we do here at 4:45 every day. We have what we call feedbackies. Somebody literally sings out feedbackies, and the whole team stops in their pairs, turns to the person next to you and say, how did I do today? Is there anything you're concerned about? And what I tell them is, if we practice these kind of things when the stakes are low, we will be better prepared to deliver good messages when the stakes are high.
One last question, Rich, that came in is that do you have companies that you can cite as, I guess you could say, case studies that have followed some of the principles that we've talked about today, as well as in your book, in terms of creating a joyful workplace?
Yeah, no, it's been amazing to see the companies that have come to learn from us, taken classes from us, and begin to bring those practices back to their organization. And they're companies large and small, companies that you know, seem to be fairly willing to talk about our relationship with them. Some like to keep it more of a secret. Companies like Nationwide Financial in Columbus, Ohio, about a 9,000 person IT team that has fundamentally changed how they do work over the past dozen years or so. We were there with them at the beginning of their journey. It's amazing what they've done since then. You know, most of it on their own, but very, very much like Menlo, at a much larger scale, of course. So they had to implement other practices too. But you can see a lot of the elements there. Even non-software teams have learned from us. Companies like Mass Mutual or General Electric Corporation have units within those, not the whole company, of course. But it's amazing to see the effects of these kind of cultural shifts that people have taken on. And then we've worked directly with some software teams where they you know, they work so closely with us, and they do that because they not only want us to help them build their software and teach their team the technology we're putting together, but they literally want to be affected by our culture. They want to adopt our practices over time. And the pairing construct helps a lot there, because in that case, we literally pair our people with their people, so that by the time we one day pull apart, when either the project ends or it hits the right stage, they have not only been you know, exposed to every piece of technology we've helped them build over the months or years that we work together, but they've also been directly exposed to the actual attributes of our culture, our process, and our systems. So now it feels more natural to them, and they continue to do that kind of work going forward.
Wow, that's great. Can you move on to the next slide and maybe talk a little bit about your talks at the conference and how they're maybe a little bit different or related or kind of tied in with what we discussed today?
So I have this incredible empathy for people who work in the quality arena, because I think the quality assurance teams of most software teams are often treated as second-class citizens. They're stuck over in the basement of Building 3. They are often forbidden from talking to the programmers who created the mess in the first place. They're often given substandard work that they have to kind of test quality into. So the question is, what if quality became your mantra? What if you try to embed quality in everything you do? Because I think, for me personally, what I wanted to do as a software engineer was see the work of my heart, my hands, my mind, get out into the world and delight the people it's intended to serve. I wanted people to come back to me and say, I love that software you built. You made my life better because of it. And if you know, the only thing we did was create great designs, but the software quality itself paled in comparison, we'll never get to that kind of joy. So what I'm going to talk about in the conference in October is, how does quality embed itself in everything we do? And for the quality professionals in our world, how is it that we elevated them to the very top of the heap rather than the afterthought at the end of the process? And you know, I'll intrigue them with a different relationship with our programming team. I'll intrigue them with the fact that our quality professionals here are paid at the same level as everybody else in the organization. So there isn't a two-tiered paid structure because we somehow value our programmers more than our quality assurance people. And then how does the quality part of our function actually become part of the team in the process in a way that will probably surprise many of your attendees who maybe live the more traditional quality life that I saw for so many years in my career.
Sure, that's actually really exciting stuff. A lot of people are talking about that as far as, especially in Agile, and integrating quality into the whole process rather than having it at the end and having a mini waterfall.
Well, and there's another movement I hear in the Agile circles that I disagree with fundamentally. It's like, well, we don't need quality people anymore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I disagree. There's a certain quality to quality people. They look at things differently than the people creating the software, and that perspective, that wiring is very important to creating great software in the world.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot, Rich, for your webinar today. And to our audience, the webinar has been recorded. We'll make it available via our YouTube channel. And we also still have the early bird special registration going on up until September 15th. So if you want to get a couple $100 worth of savings, and as well as see Rich give his talk on building a workplace that people love, be great to go and register. And we'll see you next time. We have another webinar coming up in about 3 weeks, and we'll see you then. Thanks very much, Rich.
You bet, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Okay.